Under the blood moon's unyielding gaze, the snow wept crimson for sisters bound by fate's cruel thread. Elowyn Price knelt in the frost-bitten square of Eldridge Pack's heart, her knees sinking into the unyielding white like roots, seeking mercy from barren earth. The wind howled through the jagged peaks encircling the village, carrying the distant ueaves of wolves that echoed her sister's muffled sobs. It was winter's deepest bite, the kind that clawed into bones and whispered of forgotten gods, but Elowyn felt none of it. Her world had narrowed to the wooden platform before her, where chains rattled like the judgments of the Deusa herself. Her sister, Leora, stood bound there, her frail form trembling under the torchlight's flickering dance. Leora's crime was not her own, punishment inherited from their father's ancient betrayal, a debt the Pack's elders deemed unpaid. The law of the Pack was ironclad, blood for blood, exile or execution for the tainted line. Leora, the fragile Omega born 2 winters after Elowyn, had been chosen as the vessel for retribution. Her wide eyes, mirrors of Elowyn's own stormy gray, pleaded silently across the gathering crowd. The air reeked of pine smoke and fierce sweat, the flames from the central pyre casting long shadows that twisted like specters over the assembled wolves. Alphas in fur-lined cloaks murmured among themselves, their breaths clouding the night, while betas gripped spears etched with lunar runes. Omegas like Elowyn huddled at the edges, their sense muted by suppression herbs, invisible threads in the Pack's rigid weave. But Elowyn could not stay silent. The blood-red amulet at her throat, their mother's last gift, a polished stone said to hold the essence of shared life, burned against her skin, a talisman pulsing with the rhythm of Leora's faltering heartbeat. She rose, her woolen cloak shedding snow like shed tears, and stepped forward. The crowd parted with growls of surprise, the elder's eyes narrowing beneath hooded brows. "Elowyn Price," intoned Elder Thorne, his voice gravel over ice. "This is no place for the unmarked. Return to the shadows." But shadows held no solace. Elowyn's voice cut through the wind, steady as the mountain's spine. "Kill me instead of my sister." The words hung in the frigid air, drawing a collective inhale. Gasps rippled like wind through pines, and Leora's cry pierced the silence. "No, Elowyn." But Elowyn pressed on, her gaze locked on the executioner's axe, its blade gleaming silver under the moon. The elder's face twisted, a map of scars from old wars. "The law demands the innocent's blood to cleanse the guilty's stain. Your offer changes nothing. Your father's treason taints you both." "Taints?" Elowyn's laugh was bitter frost, her hands clenching the amulet until its edges bit into her palm. Warmth trickled down her fingers, blood, her own, mingling with the stone's deep red. "Our father died for this Pack, scouting borders against the rival clans. His betrayal was a lie spun by those who coveted his maps. Leora had no hand in it, neither did I. If blood must spill, let it be mine. She is the light we have left." The crowd stirred, whispers swelling like a gathering storm. An alpha near the front bared his teeth, his scent of dominance flooding the square, but Elowyn held her ground. Her Omega nature screamed submission, the instinct to yield warring with the fire in her veins. She had always been the protector, the one who mended Leora's wounds after the Pack's taunts, who shared scraps under starless skies when their home was reduced to ashes by the Elder's decree. Exile had already claimed their hearth. Now it hungered for their lives. Elder Thorne raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "The Deusa's justice is not bargained with. The sentence stands." He nodded to the executioner, a hulking beta whose axe rose like judgment incarnate. Leora's chains clinked as she strained forward. "Elowyn, run, please!" But Elowyn surged onto the platform, shoving past the guard with a strength born of desperation. She wrapped her arms around Leora, the amulet pressing between them, its stone now slick with her blood. "If you take her, You take me, she whispered fiercely into her sister's ear, inhaling the faint scent of wildflowers that clung to Leora despite the chains. The world blurred, the torch flames leaping higher, the snow swirling in frantic eddies, the moon above watching with indifferent silver eyes. The axe descended, a shadow slicing the night. Elauwyn's heart thundered, a drumbeat against the silence of her resolve. What was strength if not this? Choosing mercy for another when none had been shown to you. The blade halted inches from her neck, not by her hand, but by a command that boomed like thunder across the peaks. Halt! The voice was deep, resonant, carrying the weight of ancient oaths. The crowd parted again, this time in awe, as a figure emerged from the tree line. Tall as the sentinel pines, cloaked in black fur edged with silver, he moved with the predatory grace of a storm-given form. Silas Draven, Alpha King of the Northern Realms, his eyes, blue as glacial depths, fixed upon the scene with an intensity that quelled the wind itself. The elders bowed low, but Silas ignored them, his gaze locking onto Elauwyn and Leora. A scar traced his jaw, a pale crescent moon against his weathered skin, speaking of battles won and guilts borne. He carried the scent of pine and iron, of leadership forged in fire and loss. Whispers spread. The king, long absent from Eldridge's borders, drawn back by rumors of unrest. But why now? Why this moment? You dare invoke the Deuce's name for inherited sins? Silas's voice was velvet over steel, directed at the elders. He stepped closer, his boots crunching snow, and Elauwyn's breath caught. Up close, his presence was overwhelming, a tidal pull that stirred something primal within her. Fear, yes, but curiosity too, like the first crack in winter's ice. Elderthorn stammered, "My king, the law bends to justice," Silas interrupted, his eyes never leaving Elauwyn. In them she saw not pity, but recognition, a mirror to her own hidden fractures. "This execution ends. Release them." The square erupted in murmurs, the torchlight flickering as if the flames themselves protested. Elauwyn clung to Leora, the amulet warm between them, its blood-red glow seeming to pulse in time with the king's unyielding stare. Freedom dangled like a fragile thread, but in its weave she sensed the unraveling of more than chains, a destiny stirring beneath the snow, waiting to be unearthed. The chains fell away with a clatter that echoed like shattered oaths, the executioner's axe lowering as if weighed by the king's command alone. Elauwyn held Leora close, her sister's body sagging against her, a fragile warmth amid the encroaching cold. The amulet between them throbbed, its blood-red stone absorbing the droplets from Elauwyn's palm, the metallic tang mingling with the sharp scent of pine and smoldering torches. She lifted her gaze to Silas Draven, the Alpha King, whose presence filled the square like a gathering storm, his blue eyes piercing through the veil of her defiance. He did not smile, nor offer words of comfort. Instead, he extended a hand gloved in dark leather, scarred from battles long past, and the crowd's murmurs hushed to a reverent silence. "Come," he said, his voice low, threaded with an authority that brooked no refusal. Yet in its timbre, Elauwyn caught an undercurrent of weariness, a shadow that mirrored the crescent scar along his jaw, a mark not of triumph, but of survival's bitter cost. Fear coiled in her gut, instinctive as the Omega's pull to submit, but she resisted, straightening her spine against the wind that whipped snowflakes like needles across her skin. Who was this king to intervene? Eldridge Pack had whispered of Silas Draven for years, the ruler who had united the Northern Realms after the Blood Wars, only to vanish into the wilds, haunted by the ghosts of fallen allies. His return now felt like fate's cruel jest, saving them only to claim something in return. Curiosity flickered beneath the dread. What wound drove a king to defy his own laws? Leora whimpered, her fingers digging into Elauwyn's arm, but Elowen nodded once, sharp and unyielding. She supported her sister as they descended the platform, the wood creaking underfoot, each step crunching through the frost-hardened snow. The elders watched with narrowed eyes, Elder Thorn's lips curling in unspoken protest, but none dared challenge the king. Silas turned, leading them toward the tree line where his mount, a massive black stallion with eyes like embers, waited, steam rising from its flanks in the chill night. The journey blurred into a haze of motion and cold. They rode double behind Silas, Leora nestled between Elowen's arms, the amulet's warmth a small anchor against the gallop that jarred her bones. The wind tore at their cloaks, carrying distant weavos that seemed to mourn the night's upheavals. Silas rode ahead, his broad shoulders cutting through the storm like a blade, but Elowen felt his awareness of them, a subtle shift in his posture whenever Leora's shivers grew too fierce. He paused once at a frozen stream where moonlight fractured on the ice and dismounted to drape his own fur mantle over Leora. His touch was brief, impersonal, yet the scent of him, iron and ancient forests, lingered, stirring an unwelcome heat in Elowen's chest. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice nearly lost to the gale as they crested a ridge overlooking a valley shrouded in mist. The question burned, born of the fear that this salvation was but a prelude to greater chains. Silas glanced back, his profile etched silver by the moon, the scar catching the light like a whispered secret. "Because justice without mercy is tyranny," he replied, his tone measured, as if reciting an old creed etched into his soul. "Your father's betrayal was no such thing. I knew him, scouted with him in the Shadow Wars. The maps he died for saved my flank at Ravencrest Pass." Guilt shadowed his words, a melancholy depth that made Elowen's breath hitch. He was no distant monarch. He carried wounds as raw as her own rejection, the pack's scorn a blade that had carved her long before this night. They descended into a hidden ravine where jagged rocks formed natural walls against the wind and a cave mouth yawned like the Deuce's own breath. Silas led them inside, the stallion tethered to a frost-laced pine. The interior glowed faintly from a banked fire he kindled with practiced efficiency, flint sparking against steel until flames licked at dry tinder, casting dancing shadows on walls veined with quartz that shimmered like captured stars. The air warmed slowly, heavy with the earthy scent of moss and smoke, a fragile refuge from the storm raging outside. Leora collapsed onto a bed of furs Silas unrolled, her eyelids fluttering shut in exhaustion, the color returning to her cheeks under the fire's caress. Elowen knelt beside her, wiping blood from the amulet with trembling fingers, watching as the stone seemed to drink it in, its crimson hue deepening to a velvet pulse. Silas watched from across the flames, his eyes reflecting the fire's gold, but he kept his distance, sharpening a dagger with rhythmic strokes that filled the silence. "You risk much for strangers," Elowen said, her voice softer now, the cave's intimacy peeling back her defenses. The connection tugged at her, instinctive, like the moon's pull on tides. But she denied it, rationalizing it as gratitude's illusion. He was a king, marked by duty's chains. She, an omega cast out, her loyalty bound to Leora alone. Silas's hand stilled, the blade gleaming. "Not strangers, your blood calls to the old oaths." He sheathed the dagger, his gaze dropping to the amulet. "That stone, it bears the mark of the Pathfinders. Hidden gifts, they say, for those who choose beyond survival." Fear and curiosity warred within her, the fire's crackle underscoring the unspoken. This encounter was no accident, but a thread in the Deuce's weave. Outside, the wind howled, weavos echoing like warnings, and Elowen wondered if the refuge they had found was truly safe, or merely the eye of a greater storm. What strength lay in trusting a king whose eyes held such shadowed depths? Mercy, perhaps, was the truest blade, cutting through the ice of isolation. As the flame steadied, casting a warm glow over Leora's sleeping form, Silas rose to stand watch at the cave's mouth, his silhouette framed by swirling snow. Elowen felt the pull again, undeniable now, born not of weakness, but of the quiet curiosity that bloomed in fear's shadow, a bridge between their fractured worlds, fragile as the fire's light. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The cave's fire whispered secrets to the stone walls, its flames curling like hesitant fingers toward the encroaching shadows of night. Elowen sat cross-legged on the furs, her back against the rough-hewn rock, watching Leora's chest rise and fall in the rhythm of uneasy sleep. The amulet rested heavy against her collarbone, its blood-red stone now cool to the touch, as if it had sated itself on her offering. The metallic scent of her dried blood lingered faintly, mingling with the cave's damp earthiness and the sharp tang of pine smoke. Outside, the wind's howl had softened to a mournful keen, but it carried echoes, weavos, not of wild wolves, but of the pack's hunters, baying for what had been stolen from their justice. Silas remained at the entrance, his broad frame a sentinel against the storm. He had shed his cloak, revealing a tunic scarred by old claw marks, the fabric stretched taut over muscles, honed by endless winters. His blue eyes scanned the darkness beyond, reflecting the fire's glow like fractured ice, and Elowen wondered at the weight he carried. A king, they called him, yet here he crouched like any fugitive, his dagger at his side, ever ready. The scar along his jaw caught the light, a pale reminder of wounds that time had not fully sealed. Guilt, perhaps, for the wars that had claimed so many, or for the oaths that bound him still. She shifted, the furs rustling softly, and Leora stirred with a small whimper. Elowen reached out, brushing a strand of damp hair from her sister's forehead, the touch grounding her amid the uncertainty. Gratitude warred with suspicion in her chest. This refuge felt too fragile, too borrowed from a stranger whose mercy might curdle into demand. "They'll come for us," she murmured, her voice threading through the fire's crackle. "The elders won't let this stand. Eldridge Pack clings to their laws like frost to bone." Silas turned his head slightly, not fully facing her, his profile etched in firelight and shadow. "Let them come," he replied, his tone low and steady, laced with the melancholy of one who had faced such storms before. "I've defied worse than pack elders. The northern realms fracture under old grudges. Your father's maps exposed the rot at Ravencrest, the traitors who sold our borders for power. Thorn and his ilk are remnants of that poison." Elowen's breath caught, the amulet warming against her skin as if echoing his words. She had heard whispers of Ravencrest, the pass where the blood wars turned tides, where her father had vanished into legend. To learn now that Silas had known him, had fought beside him, stirred a reluctant empathy, a bridge across the chasm of their worlds. He was no aloof monarch. His eyes held the same haunted depth she saw in her own reflection after sleepless nights, guarding Leora from the pack's scorn. Yet she resisted the pull, rationalizing it as survival's necessity. An Omega and a king shared no true bond. Hers was forged in exile's fire, his in throne's cold iron. The night deepened, the cave's quartz veins pulsing faintly under the fire's caress, like veins of moonlight trapped in stone. Leora woke once, her gray eyes fluttering open to the unfamiliar warmth, and Elowen pressed a waterskin to her lips, the cool liquid tasting of melted snow and faint minerals. Silas watched from his post, his silence a heavy presence, until he finally moved, adding twisted branches to the flames. Sparks danced upward, illuminating the fine lines of weariness around his eyes, and for a moment Elowen glimpsed the man beneath the crown, the one burdened by duty's relentless pull. "Why save us?" she asked again, bolder now in the intimacy of the fire's glow. The question had festered since the square, born of fear that his intervention masked a deeper claim. A king has no need for outcasts like us. What debt do you collect? He paused, the branch hovering in his hand, flames reflecting in his gaze like distant stars. No debt, he said softly, dropping the wood to the fire, where it hissed and bloomed brighter. But a reckoning. Your father's death haunts me still. I led that scout, promised his return. The betrayal that followed. It shattered alliances, left scars deeper than any blade. His voice cracked, just once, a fracture in the steel, and Eowyn felt it resonate in her own chest, the shared ache of loss. Guilt marked him as surely as the scar on his jaw, a wound that bled into every choice. In that vulnerability, empathy flickered to life, tentative as the first thaw, transforming the cave's confines from prison to shared sanctuary. Outside, the Uivos grew nearer, a chorus of pursuit slicing through the wind. Silas tensed, his hand drifting to his dagger, and Eowyn rose, pulling Leora behind her. The air thickened with threat, the scent of approaching wolves, musk and fury, wafting on the gusts. "Stay back!" Silas commanded, stepping into the mouth of the cave, his body a barrier against the night. Shadows shifted beyond, eyes gleaming yellow in the moonlight, and the first growl rumbled like thunder over snow. Eowyn clutched the amulet, its stone heating fiercely as if awakening to the danger. 3 hunters emerged from the tree line, their forms hulking under fur cloaks, spears glinting with lunar etchings. Eldridge's enforcers, loyal to Thorn's unyielding creed. "Traitor king!" the lead one snarled, his voice gravel and rage. "You steal our justice. The tainted blood must flow." Silas's response was a low growl of his own, primal and unyielding, his eyes flashing with the Alpha's fire. He lunged forward, dagger drawn, meeting the first spear with a clash that echoed off the rocks. Snow sprayed as they grappled, the hunter's blade whistling past Silas's shoulder, drawing a thin line of blood that welled dark against his tunic. Eowyn pressed Leora deeper into the cave, her heart pounding in sync with the fray, but instinct surged. She could not stand idle. Grabbing a loose stone from the floor, its edges sharp as resolve, she hurled it at the second hunter creeping toward the entrance. It struck true, glancing off his temple, buying Silas a moment to drive his dagger home. The fight blurred into visceral chaos, grunts and the wet thud of flesh, blood scent blooming sharp and coppery amid the pine. Silas moved like a tempest, his movements precise yet weary, each strike carrying the weight of old guilts transmuted into fury. One hunter fell, clutching a gash across his throat, his blood staining the snow crimson under the moon's indifferent watch. The others faltered, retreating into the shadows with howls of defiance, but not before Silas took a spear thrust to the thigh, staggering back with a hiss of pain. Eowyn rushed to him as he slumped against the cave wall, tearing a strip from her cloak to bind the wound. Her hands trembled, but she worked swiftly, the amulet brushing his skin and sending a jolt through them both. A spark of connection, instinctive and electric. His blood soaked the fabric, warm and vital, mingling with hers from earlier, and in that shared crimson, the bond deepened, empathy forging into something unnameable. He met her eyes, blue depths softening with unspoken thanks, and for the first time she saw not a king, but a man choosing mercy amid the storm. The wind carried the retreating Uivos away, leaving silence broken only by the fire's steady crackle and Leora's soft breaths. Silas leaned back, his hand covering hers briefly on the bandage, the touch lingering like a promise. In the refuge's fragile peace, Eowyn felt the walls between them thin, the juices weave tightening around their fates. What was strength, if not standing together against the encroaching dark? The amulet pulsed warmly, a symbol of blood shared and oaths reborn, as the night held its breath for what dawn might unveil. Dawn crept into the ravine like a hesitant lover, its pale light filtering through the cave's mouth in slender shafts that pierced the lingering shadows. Elowen stirred from a shallow sleep, her body aching from the night's vigil, the furs beneath her damp with the cave's chill breath. The fire had burned low, reduced to glowing embers that whispered of spent fury, their faint warmth no match for the frost seeping from the stone. Leora slept on, her face peaceful now, the lines of terror smoothed by exhaustion, but Elowen's gaze drifted to Silas, slumped against the wall where she had left him. His thigh was bound tight with her makeshift bandage, the fabric darkened by blood that had seeped through despite her efforts. He breathed evenly, eyes closed, the scar on his jaw a silver thread in the dimness, but even in repose his presence commanded the space. A king felled, yet unbroken. She rose quietly, the amulet shifting against her chest, its weight a constant companion, now humming with an inner warmth that defied the cold. Kneeling beside him, Elowen peeled back the cloth, wincing at the gash. Deep and jagged, the spear's cruel work, edges inflamed and weeping. The scent of iron and infection hung heavy, mingling with the earthy musk of his skin, and fear tightened her throat. He had saved them, spilled his blood for outcasts, and now his strength ebbed like the receding tide. What was mercy if not returned? Her hands hovered, trembling, driven by an instinct deeper than reason. The Omega's urge to nurture, twisted by the amulet's subtle pull. As her fingers brushed the wound, the stone flared, a sudden crimson glow blooming beneath her tunic. Heat surged through her veins, not painful but insistent, like the moon's call awakening dormant rivers. Elowen gasped, pulling back, but the light persisted, threading into Silas's flesh like veins of fire. Visions flickered at the edges of her mind, fragmented images of snow-choked passes, a father's hand sketching maps under starlight, and a king's silhouette against a blood moon, haunted by shadows that clawed at his soul. The amulet drank from her, drawing essence through her touch. Blood memory, the elders had called it in hushed tales of the pathfinders, those rare Omegas who navigated not just lands but fates, healing the unseen wounds that festered in the mighty. Silas's eyes snapped open, blue depths widening in shock as the glow enveloped them both. Pain twisted his features, then eased, the gash knitting before her eyes, flesh mending with a soft, ethereal hum. He gripped her wrist, not in rejection, but anchor, his breath ragged against the cave's hush. "What are you?" he murmured, voice rough with awe and the remnants of agony. The connection deepened, a visceral thread binding their sense, pine and iron weaving with her wildflower essence and the faint copper of shared blood. Elowen felt it all, his guilt, a chasm carved by the blood wars, the betrayal at Ravencrest, where he had led her father to death's door, believing the maps a salvation that proved poison. And beneath it, a curse unspoken, the Deuce's mark on kings who failed their oaths, a shadow that sapped his strength, turning alliances to ash. She withdrew her hand, the amulet dimming to a steady pulse, but the visions lingered, clarifying like mist burned away by dawn. "The Pathfinder's gift," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of revelation. It had always been there, dormant in her bloodline, dismissed as Omega frailty by the pack. But now, manifested in this hidden sanctum, it unveiled her role, not mere survivor, but key to unraveling the Northern Realm's fractures. The amulet, forged from her mother's veinstone, held the map's true essence, paths not of land, but of redemption, guiding the broken to wholeness. Silas's curse, the guilt that bound him, could be severed by one who chose mercy over vengeance, an Omega unbound by alpha hierarchies. He sat up slowly, testing the healed limb, his gaze never leaving her face. Melancholy etched deeper into his features, the king's mask cracking to reveal the man scarred by duty's relentless forge. "Your father spoke of this," he said, his tone laced with wonder and sorrow. "In the Scout's firelight, he said the Diusa hid such gifts in the rejected, to remind us that power without compassion is a hollow throne. I thought it legend, until now." His hand reached for the amulet, fingers brushing hers, igniting sparks that danced like fireflies in the dim cave. The touch was electric, stirring the resisted pull into something undeniable. Not instant love, but a destiny's forge where fear yielded to purpose. Elowen rationalized it still, survival's alliance, nothing more, but her heart betrayed her, pounding with the rhythm of his unresolved oaths. Leora stirred then, her eyes fluttering open to the scene, confusion giving way to quiet awe as she saw Silas whole. "Elowen, what happened?" But before words could form, a distant rumble echoed through the ravine. Hoofbeats and howls, the pack's pursuit swelling like a gathering blizzard. Silas rose, pulling Elowen to her feet, his grip firm yet gentle. The shared warmth of the healing, lingering like a promise, etched in blood. "They come not just for you," he said, voice steadying into resolve, "but for what you represent. Thorn fears the old truths your gift unearths, the injustices that propped his power." Outside, the first rays gilded the snow, turning the world to fractured gold and white, but the air thickened with threat. Shadows moved at the ravine's edge, more hunters, reinforced, their spears catching the light like accusatory fangs. Elder Thorn himself led them, his scarred face twisted in fury, flanked by alphas whose scents flooded the wind, dominance laced with betrayal's rot. "The tainted witch and the fallen king," he bellowed, his voice carrying over the crunch of boots on frost. "The Dusa demands balance. Your interference mocks her law." Silas stepped forward, shielding the sisters, his healed form radiating renewed strength. But Elowen's gift hummed within her, visions sharpening, paths through the conflict, choices that could shatter the pack's iron creed or bind it anew. The amulet warmed, a beacon in the dawn's chill, symbol of blood's true power, not to curse, but to redeem. In Silas's eyes, she saw the realization dawn fully. She was the key, the Omega whose hidden light could crown mercy over tyranny, unraveling his guilt and the realm's divides. Yet acceptance warred with her resistance, the fear of entanglement in a king's shadowed fate. What strength lay in embracing a destiny that demanded her heart's surrender? The hunters advanced, snow swirling in eddies around their forms, the moon's pale echo fading against the rising sun. Elowen clutched Leora's hand, the bond of sisters anchoring her as the confrontation loomed. A revelation not just of power, but of the moral crossroads ahead, where love's proof would be forged in choice's fire. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the ravine's mouth framed a tableau of judgment, dawn's gold bleeding into the snow like spilled lifeblood from an ancient wound. Elowen stood shoulder to shoulder with Silas, Leora's hand clutched in hers, the amulet's crimson pulse a frantic heartbeat against her chest. The air hung thick with the pack's advancing scents, musk of dominance, acrid bite of resentment, and the undercurrent of betrayal that had poisoned Eldridge for generations. Elder Thorn dismounted at the forefront, his scarred visage twisted into a mask of righteous fury, flanked by a dozen hunters whose spears formed a bristling wall. Among them loomed Garrick, the rival alpha whose eyes burned with covetous fire, his broad frame scarred from old skirmishes, a usurper who had whispered the lies that doomed her father. Silas's stance was unyielding, his healed thigh bearing weight without falter, but Elowen felt the tremor in his grip on her arm, a king's resolve laced with the melancholy of ghosts rising from the frost. The wind stirred, carrying weavos that twisted into accusations, the snow swirling in eddies that mirrored the turmoil churning within her. Revelation had cracked her open, the Pathfinder's gift a double-edged blade. It healed, yes, but now it demanded she wield it, navigating not just flesh, but the fractured oaths of the North. Freedom dangled before her like a mirage. Flee with Leora into the wilds. Leave the pack's rot to fester. Or stand, forgive the betrayals that scarred them all, and risk binding her fate to Silas's shadowed throne. Love, if it stirred in this storm, was no soft reward, but a trial of compassion over the instinct to survive alone. Thorn's voice boomed, gravel grinding against the dawn's hush. You mock the Deuce's weave, Draven. This Omega witch and her tainted kin threaten the balance we've bled to maintain. Garrick brings proof. The maps your father Price sold were no myth. They led our enemies to Ravencrest, cost us brothers in the snow. He gestured to Garrick, who stepped forward, a rolled parchment clutched in his fist, its edges frayed like the edges of truth itself. The rival Alpha's gaze raked over Elowen. Lingering on the amulet with a hunger that made her skin crawl, his scent flooding the air, steel and ambition, the aroma of one who craved the crown Silas wore like a noose. Silas's growl rumbled low, a thunder in his chest that vibrated through Elowen, stirring the instinctive pull she still resisted. Lies forged in your greed, Thorn. I was there at Ravencrest. Price's maps saved my life. Exposed your dealings with the southern clans. You branded him traitor to bury your own shame. His blue eyes, glacial yet warmed by the gift's lingering echo, fixed on Garrick. The confrontation uncoiled like a serpent from the past. Garrick, once Silas's second in the Blood Wars, had turned coat for power, whispering poison that shattered alliances and left Silas haunted by the fallen. Guilt etched deeper into the king's scar, a pale crescent now flushed with the dawn, and Elowen glimpsed it through the amulet's hum. Visions of that pass, snow choked with bodies, her father's final stand buying time for Silas's retreat. Garrick laughed, a bark that echoed off the rocks, unfurling the parchment to reveal ink-scrawled lines that mimicked the true maps but twisted into treachery. Proof enough for the pack. The Deuce demands blood for blood. Execute the sisters, or step down, fallen king. Your mercy weakens us all. The hunters advanced, boots crunching snow into crimson-flecked slush where Silas's blood from the night before had frozen. Spears leveled, their tips catching the light like fangs hungry for retribution, and Leora whimpered, pressing closer to Elowen, her frail form a reminder of the freedom at stake. Elowen's heart thundered, the amulet flaring hot, its stone drawing from her veins a surge of clarity. Paths branched in her mind. War, where Silas's blade met Garrick's in a clash that could raise the ravine, spilling more blood to sate old debts. Or forgiveness, a moral chasm requiring her to invoke the gift, to reveal the map's true essence hidden in the stone, lines of redemption that exposed Garrick's forgery and Thorn's complicity. But to do so meant stepping into the light, claiming a role that bound her to Silas, to the pack's unraveling hierarchies. Love or liberty? The question clawed at her, romantic in its tragedy, the tenderness born of shared wounds, tempting her to yield. She rationalized it as duty to Leora, to her father's legacy, yet the king's glance, melancholic, pleading, stirred something deeper, a spiritual tether under the fading moon's watchful eye. No more blood, she whispered, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. Stepping forward, she raised the amulet, its glow blooming crimson against the dawn, illuminating the ravine's quartz veins like awakened stars. The hunters faltered, sense shifting from aggression to unease, and Thorn's eyes widened in superstitious dread. The Deuce hid truths in the rejected, Elowen declared, her tone steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. The stone pulsed, projecting ethereal lines onto the snow, true maps unfurling, paths that wove through the peaks, revealing hidden alliances and Garrick's secret pacts with rivals. Gasps rippled through the ranks, the wind falling silent as if the world held its breath. Garrick lunged, spear thrusting toward her, but Silas intercepted, his dagger clashing in a spray of sparks that lit the air like fireflies in winter. They grappled, bodies slamming into the snow, blood welling from a gash on Silas's arm that mirrored the knight's wound. Eowyn knelt, pressing her hand to the earth, the amulet channeling her essence into the vision. Images of Ravencrest's betrayal flooded the pack's minds, Garrick's whispers, Thorne's signatures on illicit scrolls, her father's innocence etched in star-lit sketches. The hunters lowered their weapons, murmurs swelling into outrage, turning on the elders like a tide against rock. Thorne snarled, drawing a hidden blade, but Garrick broke free, his face contorted in rage. "Witches' lies!" He charged Eowyn, but she met his eyes, the gift surging, a spiritual confrontation, her compassion a shield against his venom. "Choose," she said softly, the word of philosophy carved in frost. "Power built on lies crumbles. Forgive the past, or let war claim you." Garrick hesitated, the spear trembling, his ambition warring with the revealed truth. Silas rose behind him, dagger poised, but held, Mercy's choice mirroring her own. The rival Alpha dropped the weapon, collapsing to his knees in the snow, the pack's howls shifting from pursuit to judgment. Thorne fled into the tree line, shadows swallowing his form, but Garrick's confession spilled forth, broken and raw, the forgery, the greed that had cost lives. Eowyn felt the weight lift, yet it settled heavier on her soul. The gift had saved them, but at what cost? Silas turned to her, blood streaking his face, his eyes holding a depth of gratitude laced with the king's eternal melancholy. "You chose compassion," he murmured, his hand brushing hers, the touch igniting the resisted bond into quiet acceptance. Freedom preserved, yet tethered now to this path of redemption, where love proved itself in the fire of moral trial. As the pack dispersed, oaths fracturing under the dawn's unyielding light, Eowyn pulled Leora close, the amulet cooling against her skin, its crimson a symbol of blood's dual face, curse and cure. The wind whispered of rebirth, but the ethical dilemma lingered. Had she forged alliance or invited war's deeper shadow? In Silas's shadowed gaze, she saw the question reflected, a spiritual crossroads where forgiveness crowned the fallen, yet demanded the heart's unyielding surrender. The snow settled, veiling the stains of confrontation as the northern realms stirred toward an uncertain dawn. The dawn's fragile light clawed its way over the ravine's jagged rim, gilding the snow in hues of reluctant gold, but it offered no warmth to the scene unfolding below. Eowyn stood frozen amid the settling flakes, her breath clouding the air like unspoken regrets, the amulet's crimson glow fading to a sullen ember against her chest. Leora's fingers dug into her side, a desperate anchor, while Silas loomed beside her, his bloodied dagger still clutched in a fist that trembled not from weakness, but from the storm of memories the revelation had unleashed. The pack's ranks had fractured, hunters turning on one another with growls that split the morning hush, but Garrick knelt unbowed in the crimson slush. His eyes, dark pools of shattered ambition, locked on Eowyn with a venom that chilled deeper than the wind. Thorne had vanished into the tree line, a shadow fleeing judgment, but his poison lingered in the air, thick as the metallic tang of fresh wounds. The elders who remained huddled at the ravine's edge, their fur cloaks dusted with frost, faces etched with the dawning horror of truths long buried. Whispers swelled among the betas and lesser alphas, sense shifting from unified fury to a chaotic brew of doubt and rage. Pine-sharp betrayal mingling with the earthy musk of reevaluation. Eowyn felt it all through the amulet's subtle thrum, the stone drawing threads from the ether, weaving the pack's collective ache into her own. Her father's innocence, laid bare in ethereal lines of light, had not healed. It had ignited a reckoning, forcing every soul to confront the rot that had festered under the guise of Deuce's law. Garrick rose slowly, his massive frame uncoiling like a serpent from hibernation, the dropped spear forgotten in the snow. Blood trickled from a split lip where Silas's blow had landed, staining his beard a deeper red, but his voice emerged steady, laced with the honeyed deceit that had toppled alliances before. "Witchcraft!" he snarled, stepping forward, his gaze sweeping the wavering pack. "This Omega spins illusions from her tainted blood, mocking the scars we all bear from Ravencrest. I fought beside you. Draven bled for the north, while Price's maps led the enemy straight to our throats. Thorn knew it. The elders confirmed it. Her gift is a curse, twisting mercy into weakness." Silas tensed, his blue eyes narrowing to glacial slits, the scar along his jaw pulling taut as old guilt resurfaced. Eowyn sensed it in him, the melancholy weight of that pass where he had trusted Garrick's counsel, sent her father ahead into ambush, only to watch the snow run red with the blood of brothers. The king's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent warmth spiraling through the cold, but she pulled away, rationalizing the spark as the gift's echo, nothing more. Freedom whispered to her, "Gather Leora, slip into the wilds where the peaks hid exiles like them. Leave this fractured court to devour itself." Yet the amulet burned hotter, visions flickering, paths of war where Garrick's lies rallied the doubters into a civil blade, carving the north anew, or forgiveness, a perilous bridge demanding she forgive not just for Leora, but for the man whose shadowed fate now mirrored her own. The pack stirred, a low rumble building as Garrick circled, his presence a gravitational pull on the uncertain. Several hunters nodded, spears twitching upward, their scents flaring with the comfort of old certainties. "He speaks truth," one growled, a beta with eyes hollow from lost kin. Price's line brought death. End it now, before her sorcery spreads. The words struck Eowyn like wind-whipped ice, evoking memories of taunts in Eldridge's square, the rejection that had branded her an outcast long before the axe fell. Her Omega instincts screamed retreat, to yield and vanish, but the gift hummed defiance, revealing the moral chasm. War would free her body, but chain her soul to endless flight, while compassion might bind her to Silas, to a love that proved itself not in passion's fire, but in the slow forge of shared redemption. "No," Silas thundered, stepping between her and the advancing line, his voice a resonant command that quelled the wind itself. Blood from his arm wound, dripped onto the snow, each drop blooming like accusations. But he stood unyielding, the king's ethical core shining through the melancholy veil. "Garrick's tongue is the true poison. I led at Ravencrest, saw the forgery with my own eyes. Price died a hero, his maps a light in the dark. You've built your power on his grave, rival, and Thorn's cowardice enabled it." His gaze met Eowyn's, blue depths pleading not for submission, but alliance, a silent question. Would she choose the war he could wage alone, or the forgiveness that might heal them both? Garrick lunged then, not with steel but strategy, seizing a hunter's arm and pulling him into the fray. Chaos erupted, spears clashed against Silas's dagger in a visceral symphony of grunts and sliding metal, snow spraying like shattered oaths. Eowyn shoved Leora behind a boulder, her heart pounding in rhythm with the amulet's frantic pulse, but she could not stand idle. The stone flared, crimson light spilling from her hands as she reached toward the melee, visions guiding her, paths through the violence, threads of truth to unravel the traitor's web. One hunter faltered under her influence, spear dropping as memories of Ravencrest flooded him. Not betrayal, but sacrifice, her father's stand buying precious moments for the pack's survival. Yet Garrick pressed on, his blade grazing Silas's side, drawing a hiss of pain that twisted Eowyn's gut. The king staggered but countered, driving the rival back with a fury born of long-suppressed guilt. "End this," Silas rasped, blood flecking his lips, his eyes locking on Garrick's. Confess and face the Deuce's true judgment, or die clinging to lies. The pack encircled them, breaths held in the frozen air, weavos dying to tense silence. Elowen stepped forward, the gift surging like a river breaking ice, her voice emerging soft yet unyielding, a philosophy etched in frost. What is strength, if not choosing mercy when vengeance calls loudest? Forgive the past that scarred us, Garrick, or let war claim the north you pretend to protect. The rival hesitated, blade hovering, his face a map of crumbling resolve, ambition warring with the visions now assailing him through the amulet's weave, his own whispers and shadowed counsels, Thorn's nods of complicity, the innocent blood that stained his hands. The pack murmured, turning fully now, sense shifting to condemnation. Garrick's shoulders slumped, the weapon clattering to the snow, defeat etching lines deeper than any scar. It was for power, he admitted, voice breaking like thin ice, to claim the throne when Draven faltered. Price. He knew too much. The confession rippled outward, hunters binding him with ropes woven from their cloaks, the air lightening as if the Dusa exhaled relief. But victory tasted of ash in Elowen's mouth. Silas turned to her, wounded yet whole in spirit, his hand cupping her cheek with a tenderness that pierced her defenses, the resisted bond blooming into quiet acceptance, love as proof, not prize. Freedom slipped further away, tethered now to this choice. Forgive and unite the realms under mercy's crown, or cling to liberty's illusion and watch the fractures widen. Leora rose beside her, eyes wide with awe. But the ethical weight pressed. Had compassion saved them, or merely delayed war's deeper shadow? The amulet cooled, its crimson a solemn witness, as the dawn wind carried whispers of rebirth, or ruin, across the bloodied snow. The snow settled like a shroud over the ravine, veiling the bloodied scars of confrontation in a hush that echoed the Diusa's solemn breath. Elowen felt the weight of it all pressing into her bones, the amulet's cooled crimson now a quiet sentinel against her skin, absorbing the morning's fragile light. Garrick's confession hung in the air, raw and unraveling, his bound form dragged away by the pack's shifting loyalties. But victory's dawn brought no unclouded joy. The hunters dispersed into the mist-shrouded peaks, their weavos fracturing into murmurs of doubt and tentative oaths. Yet the fractures in the north ran deeper than any blade could carve. Thorn's flight promised retaliation, whispers of southern alliances stirring like shadows beneath the ice, and Elowen knew the revolution Silas had ignited, against inherited sins, against the iron law that had nearly claimed Leora, demanded more than one dawn's light to mend. She turned to Silas, his frame silhouetted against the rising sun, blood from his wounds tracing rivulets down his arm that stained the snow in fleeting patterns like maps redrawn by fate. His blue eyes met hers, no longer glacial, but softened by the melancholy of a king who had glimpsed redemption's edge, the scar along his jaw a silver thread binding his past to this moment. The touch from earlier lingered in her veins, a warmth that defied the chill wind whipping through the ravine, carrying the faint coppery scent of spilled blood and pine resin. Empathy had woven them together in the cave's firelight, the Pathfinder's gift revealing his curse, not mere guilt, but a spiritual tether from the Dusa, sapping his strength for the oaths broken at Ravencrest, turning his rule into a hollow throne of isolation. Now, in the aftermath, she saw the choice laid bare. Sacrifice her hidden light to sever it, curing him at the cost of her own essence. Or unite, forging a bond where love proved itself through shared rebirth, transcending Omega and Alpha divides. Leora clung to her side, her frail hand trembling in Elowen's grasp, the wildflower scent of her sister a fragile reminder of the freedom won. "Is it over?" Leora whispered, her gray eyes wide, reflecting the quartz-veined rocks that shimmered like captured moonlight. But Elowen knew it was not. The pack's eyes lingered on them from the tree line, sense of curiosity and wariness mingling with the frost. Freedom tempted her still, a path into the wilds, sisters unbound, leaving the realms to their wars. Yet the amulet pulsed faintly, drawing from her the visions of what might be. Silas alone, his curse deepening until it claimed him, the north splintering under Garrick's lingering poison, or Union, where her gift illuminated the true maps, paths of compassion that could rewrite the Pack's creeds, ending punishments born of old lies. "What now?" Silas asked, his voice low and resonant, threaded with the ethical weariness of one who had borne too many crowns of thorns. He stepped closer, the heat of his body cutting through the cold like a hearth's promise, his gloved hand hovering near hers without claiming it. In his gaze, she saw the man beneath the king, ethical to his core, marked by the guilt of lives lost under his command, yet choosing mercy time and again, as he had in the square. The resisted pull between them bloomed into something undeniable, not the instant blaze of romance, but a slow, tragic fire, tenderness forged in the crucible of shared wounds where rejection birthed renascimento. Elowen rationalized it one last time. For Leora, for her father's legacy, for the Deuce's weave that had entwined their fates under the blood moon. But deeper, in the quiet thrum of her heart, she felt the truth, love as redemption, a proof that healed the broken without demanding reward. She lifted the amulet, its stone catching the dawn's gold, and pressed it to his chest, over the scar that mirrored his soul's hidden gash. "We end the cycle," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear coiling in her gut like winter's first frost. The gift surged, crimson light spilling outward in tendrils that wove through the air, touching Silas like moonlight on snow. Visions flooded them both, Ravencrest not as betrayal, but as sacrifice. Her father's maps a beacon that had saved the North from greater ruin. Garrick's lies exposed as the true curse, Thorn's flight a catalyst for Pax to rise against inherited judgments. Pain lanced through Elowen, the stone drawing her essence, a sacrifice of vitality. Her strength ebbing as it knit Silas's curse into wholeness, his guilt transmuting to resolve, the Deuce's tether snapping like brittle ice. He gasped, gripping her shoulders, his blue eyes widening as the melancholy lifted, replaced by a fierce spiritual clarity. The wound on his arm sealed, blood drying to harmless flakes, and in that union, their scents entwined, iron and pine with wildflower and copper, a symphony under the fading moon's eye. The pack watched from afar, Uivos rising not in challenge but reverence, the wind carrying the echo of change across the peaks. Leora squeezed her hand, tears tracing paths down her cheeks, the fragile Omega blooming in the light of safety won. Elowen sagged against Silas, exhaustion claiming her, but in his arms she found not chains but rebirth. A revolution sparked where mercy crowned the fallen, and love proved its worth in the quiet choice to heal rather than flee. As the sun crested fully, bathing the ravine in unrelenting gold, Silas lifted her onto his mount, Leora beside them, the stallion's warmth a bulwark against the lingering cold. The northern realms stirred, packs gathering under new oaths, the blood-red amulet, now a symbol not of curse but covenant, pulsing with the promise of paths untrodden. Elowen leaned into him, the bond accepted at last, a tragic romance etched in frost and fire. Redemption not as end, but as the dawn's eternal vigil. What was strength, if not this union? Choosing compassion's light over liberty's solitary shadow? The wind whispered of wars averted and souls reborn, the Deuce's weave tightening into a tapestry of forgiveness, as the sisters and their king rode toward a horizon veiled in snow and hope. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.